7 drinks that could be damaging your brain every day. What if the drink sitting in your hand right now, the one you reach for out of habit almost every single day, is quietly working against the organ you rely on most? Most people assume brain decline is something that happens later in life, triggered by genetics or age, something mostly out of their control. But a growing body of research suggests that certain everyday beverages may be playing a far bigger role than we realized. This video is for educational purposes only and is not intended to diagnose any condition or replace advice from a qualified healthcare professional. If you have concerns about your health, it is always a good idea to speak with a doctor. Before we get into the list, I want to be upfront about something. One of the drinks we are about to cover is so common, so socially accepted, and so deeply woven into daily routines that most people would never suspect it. It shows up later in this video, and once you hear the research behind it, you may never look at it the same way again. So stick with me, because by the end of this, you will have a much clearer picture of what may actually be happening inside your head every time you take a sip. Let us start from the beginning, because understanding why these drinks matter requires understanding how the brain actually works day to day. Your brain is an incredibly demanding organ. Even though it makes up a small percentage of your total body weight, it uses a disproportionately large share of your daily energy, largely in the form of glucose and oxygen delivered through the blood. It also depends heavily on stable blood sugar, healthy blood vessels, quality sleep, and a delicate balance of chemical messengers called neurotransmitters. When any of these systems are repeatedly disrupted, over months and years, the effects can build up quietly, long before anyone notices obvious symptoms. That is part of what makes beverage choices so important. Unlike a single meal, a drink you consume daily becomes part of the background rhythm of your biology, shaping it slowly, sip after sip, day after day. It is also worth saying clearly that no single drink acts in isolation. The brain does not experience one beverage at a time, disconnected from everything else happening in a person's life. Their sleep patterns, their stress levels, their overall diet, their physical activity, and their genetics. What researchers tend to look at instead is cumulative exposure, meaning the total pattern of what someone drinks day after day across months and years. A drink that might be perfectly fine on an occasional basis can tell a very different story when it becomes an unquestioned daily habit repeated thousands of times over a lifetime. That distinction between occasional and habitual is the thread that runs through every single item on this list, and it is worth keeping in mind as we go through each one. With that context in mind, let us walk through 7 drinks that researchers have linked to potential concerns for brain health, starting with one of the most widely consumed beverages on the planet. Number 1, sugary sodas and sweetened soft drinks. Regular soda has been a fixture of daily life for generations, often paired with meals, used as an afternoon pick-me-up, or kept in the refrigerator simply out of habit. But the sugar content in a single can be surprisingly high, sometimes reaching close to 40 grams, which is roughly 10 teaspoons. When that much sugar enters the bloodstream quickly, it can cause a sharp spike in blood glucose followed by an equally sharp crash. Over time, researchers have observed that repeated blood sugar spikes may be associated with inflammation and changes in blood vessel health, both of which are closely tied to how well the brain functions. Some studies have gone further, suggesting that people who consume sugary drinks frequently may show differences in memory performance and brain volume compared to those who consume them rarely. It is worth noting that correlation is not the same as causation, and researchers are still working to understand the full picture. Still, many neurologists now view chronically high sugar intake as one of several modifiable factors that may influence long-term cognitive health. Consider someone like Margaret, a 71-year-old retired schoolteacher who had a can of regular cola with breakfast, lunch, and dinner for most of her adult life. It was not something she thought twice about. It was just part of her routine, the way coffee is for some people. When she began noticing that she was misplacing her keys more often and struggling to recall words mid-sentence, she assumed it was simply a normal part of getting older. Her doctor asked about her daily habits, and her soda intake came up almost as an afterthought. It was not framed as the definitive cause of her symptoms, but as one factor among several worth examining. Stories like this are common, not because soda alone explains cognitive changes, but because small daily habits often go unexamined until someone starts asking the right questions. There is another layer to this that researchers have only recently started to explore in more depth, which is the relationship between chronically elevated blood sugar and a condition sometimes referred to informally as insulin resistance of the brain. In simple terms, brain cells rely on insulin to help usher glucose into the cell where it can be used for energy. When the body is repeatedly exposed to large sugar loads, the cells throughout the body, including in the brain, can become less responsive to insulin over time. Some scientists have gone so far as to describe certain forms of cognitive decline as potentially having a metabolic component, since the brain's ability to efficiently use its primary fuel source may become impaired. This does not mean sugar directly causes any specific diagnosis, but it does help explain why so many researchers are paying closer attention to the connection between blood sugar regulation and long-term brain health. The good news is that this particular risk factor tends to respond well to changes in habit, often within a matter of weeks or months of reducing daily sugar intake. Number 2, energy drinks. Energy drinks occupy a strange space in the beverage world. They are marketed as tools for focus and alertness, yet the way they are formulated may work against the very brain function they claim to support. Many energy drinks combine high doses of caffeine with additional stimulants, sugar, and sometimes ingredients whose long-term effects are still not fully understood. A single can may contain caffeine levels comparable to 2 or 3 cups of coffee, consumed all at once rather than gradually. This rapid stimulant load can place significant stress on the nervous system, particularly when consumed frequently or on an empty stomach. Some research has raised concerns about how habitual high-dose energy drink consumption may affect sleep architecture, and poor sleep is one of the most well-established risk factors for impaired memory and reduced cognitive performance over time. There are also documented cases of heart-related symptoms following energy drink consumption, which indirectly affects brain health, since the brain depends entirely on a steady, healthy supply of blood. What makes energy drinks particularly worth discussing is who tends to drink them most. Younger adults, students, and shift workers often rely on them during periods of high mental demand, precisely when the brain most needs stable, restorative sleep rather than artificial alertness. The irony is that a drink designed to sharpen focus in the moment may, with repeated use, contribute to the kind of fatigue and mental fog it was meant to prevent. There is also a pattern that emergency medicine physicians have described anecdotally for years, sometimes called the crash and stack effect. This happens when someone feels the initial jolt of an energy drink begin to fade after a couple of hours, then reaches for a second one to sustain the effect, effectively stacking stimulant doses on top of each other throughout the day. Over time, this pattern can push the nervous system into a near-constant state of low-grade alertness, which is different from genuine, sustainable focus. The nervous system was not designed to operate that way indefinitely, and some researchers believe this kind of repeated stimulant stacking may contribute to longer-term issues with attention regulation, mood, and even anxiety, all of which are closely connected to how the brain functions day to day. For young people whose brains are still developing well into their mid-20s, some neurologists have expressed particular caution about frequent, high-dose energy drink use, given how sensitive the developing nervous system can be to repeated stimulant exposure. Number 3, alcohol, even in moderate amounts. Of all the drinks on this list, alcohol may be the one surrounded by the most conflicting information. For years, some studies suggested that light to moderate drinking might carry certain cardiovascular benefits. More recent research has complicated that picture considerably, with several large-scale studies suggesting there may be no truly safe amount of alcohol when it comes to brain health specifically. Alcohol is a neurotoxin, meaning it can directly affect brain cells, and it also disrupts sleep quality, impairs the body's ability to repair itself overnight, and can interfere with the absorption of important nutrients like thiamine, which plays a critical role in brain function. Brain imaging studies have found that even moderate, regular drinking may be associated with reductions in brain volume over time, particularly in regions involved in memory and decision-making. This does not mean an occasional drink at a celebration will cause harm. The concern researchers raise is more about consistent, regular consumption, the glass of wine every single night, or the after-work drink that has become an unquestioned ritual. It is the accumulation over years and decades that appears to matter most. not any single occasion. If alcohol is a regular part of your routine, it may be worth having an honest conversation with a healthcare provider about what amount, if any, makes sense for your individual health profile. One aspect of alcohol and brain health that often gets overlooked is how it affects the quality rather than simply the quantity of sleep. Many people believe alcohol helps them fall asleep faster, and for some, it does. But research using sleep monitoring equipment has repeatedly shown that alcohol tends to suppress a stage of sleep called rapid eye movement sleep, which plays an important role in processing emotions and consolidating memories from the day. This means someone might spend 8 full hours in bed after drinking, yet wake up feeling as though they never got truly restorative rest. Over years of this pattern, the cumulative loss of high-quality sleep may compound whatever direct effects alcohol has on brain tissue itself. There is also a social dimension worth mentioning gently. For some people, alcohol becomes tied to stress relief or emotional coping, which can make it a more difficult habit to examine honestly. Recognizing that pattern without judgment is often the first step many people describe when they decide to reassess their relationship with regular drinking. Number 4, diet sodas and artificially sweetened drinks. Diet soda was originally marketed as the smart alternative, a way to enjoy something sweet without the sugar and calories. But the research on artificial sweeteners and brain health has become increasingly nuanced. Some studies have suggested that certain artificial sweeteners may alter gut bacteria in ways that could influence inflammation throughout the body, including pathways that connect to the brain through what researchers call the gut-brain axis. Other research has looked at whether artificial sweeteners might affect blood vessel health in ways similar to sugar, despite containing no actual sugar themselves. One widely discussed study followed thousands of participants over several years and found a possible association between high artificial sweetener intake and an increased risk of stroke and cognitive decline. Although the researchers were careful to note that more work is needed to understand whether the sweeteners themselves are responsible or whether other lifestyle factors play a role. There is also a psychological angle worth mentioning. Some researchers believe that consuming intensely sweet flavors, even without real sugar, may keep the brain's reward pathways calibrated toward craving sweetness, which can indirectly influence overall dietary patterns. In other words, diet soda may not solve the underlying issue that led someone toward sugary drinks in the first place. This is an area where the science is still evolving, and it is one of the more surprising entries on this list, since so many people switch to diet versions specifically because they believe it is the healthier choice. It is important to add some balance here because the research on artificial sweeteners is genuinely mixed, and not every study has found cause for concern. Regulatory agencies in many countries continue to classify approved artificial sweeteners as safe for the general population within certain daily limits. The point of including this entry is not to suggest that diet soda is more dangerous than regular soda, but rather to challenge the assumption that switching to a diet version automatically removes brain-related concerns from the equation. For someone who drinks several diet sodas a day, every day, for years, it may be worth periodically reassessing that habit alongside a healthcare provider, particularly if there is a family history of neurological conditions, rather than assuming the diet label alone guarantees safety. Number 5, sweetened fruit juices and juice drinks. Fruit juice often gets a health halo simply because it comes from fruit. But the process of juicing strips away most of the fiber that would normally slow down sugar absorption, leaving behind a concentrated dose of natural sugar that behaves in the bloodstream surprisingly similarly to the sugar in soda. A single glass of apple juice or grape juice can contain as much sugar as a can of soda, sometimes more. Many commercial juice drinks add even more sugar on top of what is naturally present, while still being marketed with words like natural or made with real fruit. For the brain, what matters is not where the sugar originated, but how much of it is entering the bloodstream and how quickly. Repeated blood sugar spikes from juice, consumed daily under the belief that it is a healthy choice, may carry some of the same long-term risks discussed earlier with soda, including potential effects on blood vessel health and inflammation. Think about a parent who starts each morning by pouring a large glass of orange juice for themselves and their children, believing it to be an obviously healthy start to the day. That instinct is understandable and comes from good intentions. The nuance researchers want people to understand is not that fruit itself is harmful. Whole fruit contains fiber and nutrients that behave very differently in the body, but that juice, especially in large quantities and on a daily basis, deserves a closer look than it typically receives. The fiber that gets removed during juicing is not just filler. It plays an active role in slowing digestion, feeding beneficial gut bacteria, and moderating how quickly sugar reaches the bloodstream. When that fiber is stripped away, the same amount of natural sugar behaves very differently inside the body, arriving all at once rather than gradually over time. This is part of why nutrition researchers consistently draw a distinction between eating an orange and drinking a glass of orange juice, even though both technically come from the same fruit. For families trying to make small, meaningful changes, some pediatric nutrition specialists suggest thinking of juice more like an occasional treat than a daily breakfast staple, reserving whole fruit for the everyday choice instead. Over the course of childhood and into adulthood, this single adjustment, moving from daily juice to occasional juice, is one of the more approachable changes on this entire list. Number 6. Excess caffeine from multiple cups of coffee. Coffee itself is not the villain here, and in fact, moderate coffee consumption has been linked in various studies to certain potential cognitive benefits, including possible protective effects against some forms of decline. The concern researchers raise is specifically about excess, the fourth, fifth, or sixth cup of the day, often consumed later in the afternoon or evening. High doses of caffeine, particularly later in the day, can significantly disrupt the ability to fall into deep, restorative sleep, even if a person does not consciously feel like caffeine is keeping them awake. Deep sleep is when the brain performs much of its overnight maintenance, including a process where cerebrospinal fluid helps clear away metabolic waste products that accumulate during waking hours. When that process is repeatedly interrupted over months and years by excess caffeine, some researchers believe it may contribute to the kind of cumulative strain associated with cognitive decline later in life. There is also the matter of caffeine dependency and withdrawal, which can create cycles of fatigue, irritability, and difficulty concentrating that many people mistake for a personal focus problem rather than a chemical pattern they have built into their day. The goal here is not to demonize coffee, which many people enjoy safely as part of a balanced routine, but to highlight that more is not always better, and that the timing and total amount of caffeine consumed daily deserves genuine attention. To put this in more concrete terms, caffeine has what scientists call a half-life of roughly 5 to 6 hours in most adults, meaning that half of the caffeine from a cup of coffee consumed at 2 in the afternoon may still be circulating in the bloodstream at 8 in the evening. For someone who has a final cup around dinner time, this can mean going to bed with a meaningful amount of active stimulant still present in the system, even if they do not consciously feel wired. Sleep researchers have noted that this kind of hidden caffeine interference can reduce both the amount and the quality of deep sleep without the person ever realizing caffeine was the cause, since the effect can feel more like restlessness or difficulty settling down rather than an obvious energy spike. Simple changes, such as setting a personal cutoff time in the early afternoon, are frequently recommended by sleep specialists as a low-effort way to protect the brain's overnight repair processes without giving up coffee altogether. Number 7. Sugary specialty coffee and flavored latte drinks. This is the drink we mentioned earlier, the one hiding in plain sight. Specialty coffee drinks, the caramel lattes, the flavored cold brews, the seasonal favorites lined with whipped cream and syrup, have become such a normal part of daily life for so many people that few ever stop to examine what is actually inside the cup. A single large flavored coffee drink can contain 50 grams of sugar or more, combined with a meaningful dose of caffeine, all wrapped in something that feels, socially and emotionally, more like a treat or a comfort ritual than what it actually is, a combination of two of the very drinks we already discussed as potential concerns, layered together in one daily habit. Because it is marketed as coffee rather than as a dessert beverage, many people do not mentally categorize it the way they would a candy bar or a slice of cake, even though the sugar content can be comparable or higher. Picture someone like Robert, a 68-year-old retired accountant who treated himself to a large flavored latte every single morning for over a decade, viewing it as a small, well-earned pleasure after decades of disciplined work. When his family began noticing subtle changes in his memory and word-finding ability, The flavored latte was not something anyone thought to question at first. It took a careful conversation with his physician, walking through his daily habits in detail, before that particular ritual even came up. Again, this is not about assigning blame to a single drink or suggesting that one habit alone determines someone's cognitive future. It is about recognizing that the drinks we consume without thinking, the ones so normalized they barely register as choices, may be exactly the ones worth examining most closely. Part of what makes this category so tricky is the framing around it. These drinks are often photographed, shared, and celebrated as small joys, seasonal traditions, or personal rewards, which makes it emotionally more complicated to view them critically compared to something like a can of soda, which most people already recognize as an indulgence. Nutrition counselors sometimes describe this as the health halo effect, where the presence of coffee, a genuinely researched and often beneficial ingredient, casts a positive glow over the entire drink, even when the sugar and syrup content overwhelms whatever benefit the coffee itself might offer. This does not mean these drinks need to disappear from someone's life entirely. Many people find that simply requesting less syrup, choosing a smaller size, or treating these drinks as an occasional weekend ritual rather than a daily default allows them to keep the enjoyment while meaningfully reducing the daily sugar and stimulant load their brain and body are asked to process. So where does this leave us? Across all 7 of these drinks, a few themes repeat themselves. Frequent spikes in blood sugar, disrupted sleep, chronic low-grade inflammation, and consistent, repeated exposure to substances that stress the brain and blood vessels over time. None of these drinks on their own on a single occasion are likely to cause harm. The concern researchers consistently point to is the daily, habitual, almost invisible pattern, the drink that becomes so routine it stops being a choice at all. One statistic worth remembering from everything we covered today is that a single can of regular soda can contain close to 10 teaspoons of sugar, consumed in a matter of minutes, day after day, year after year. The encouraging part of all this research is that beverage habits are one of the most changeable parts of daily life. Small, gradual shifts, choosing water more often, being more mindful of how many cups of coffee turn into how many hours of missed sleep, reading labels on juices and flavored coffee drinks can add up meaningfully over time. If anything in this video resonated with you or reminded you of your own daily habits or someone you care about, we would genuinely love to hear about it in the comments. What is one drink from this list that surprised you the most? If you found this information valuable, please consider sharing it with someone who might benefit from hearing it. And if you would like more videos like this one, subscribing helps us continue creating them. Thank you for watching and take care of that incredible brain of yours one choice at a time.